Phil Harris and Josh Phegan come together in an incredible fortnightly podcast, Dream Big, Move Fast.
A progressive, contemporary conversation on what it takes to be a dynamic thinker, leader, and role model.
Backed with over 2 decades of friendship, trials and tribulations that teach from real-world experience and what it takes to dream big, move fast. Most people fail to achieve their audacious big dreams because they don't fully commit at the crucial moment. William R. Hewlett. Phil, what are your thoughts about this as a great little quote today to kick off on our next podcast?
Yeah, I think it's a really good one because, there's big differences between dreams and goals, right? So a dream is almost like an ambition where you don't really put an action plan in place. And I've always been taught that the difference between a dream and a goal is simply a dream with an action plan in place. If you fail to take action, then, there's a lot of great dreams out there that remain unachieved.
The age-old saying of, you got to wanna. It's a coalition of the willing, not the coerced. And if you want to make the decision to really make anything happen in your life, you got to make the decision and want to go there. And ultimately, nothing occurs and everyone's an amateur when we first start out. And you got to surround yourself with other people that are more professional and more capable, who've done it before, who can show you the steps, or ultimately build the systems and work out a way to go and do it. And it leads us into a really important conversation of leadership in what we've got to call the disruptive age. Now, Phil, this has been a pretty phenomenal journey over our period of time. I think that, we kind of thought the GFC was big at the time. We kind of thought the COVID was big at the time. And every single time that something happens, whether or not it's a global war, a change, a boom, a bust, a declining market, a rising market, not a good time to sell your rent roll. Everyone's selling their rent roll. There's a big conversation around what actually happens. And you and I were talking off guard before about the whole conversation around the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Talk to us a little bit about, your thoughts when you start to see that about leadership and what it is and what a disruptive age is. And let's maybe start there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good conversation about leadership, particularly in disruptive times. And I think that, you've mentioned a few kind of big scenarios there in terms of, we've had GFC, sometimes it's a change in legislation, sometimes it's a change in industry. There's, various things that affect. But I think the biggest thing that comes through to me, and sometimes, it might not be a global or national disruption. Sometimes it's an internal disruption within a business, whether it be a health-related issue for an employee or maybe it's a legal issue, I think if you've been around in business for a long time, you have your date with destiny with all of those particular issues. But I think the thing that really comes strong to mind for me in terms of the leadership space, when I think of some of the challenges that we've faced, and Harris, over 13 years in business now, I think one of the things we underestimate is just the ability to be solid and consistent irrespective of what is going on. So I think that those leaders that, irrespective of whatever the global environment can be, if you've got simple messaging and you are relentlessly consistent, I think people really look for solidarity in the leader, particularly in those times of crisis or times of change.
Yeah, it was interesting. I always used to think that management was kind of the thing that kept it running and leadership was the one that took it into the new space. So like literally if we could write a certain number of transactions or manage a certain number of properties, whatever we were doing as a business, you could have a great manager in there that was designed to manage the business and to keep it running and keep it safe. The leader is ultimately the one who's going to try to push that into a brand new space and take it into some destiny. And it's that whole idea that, where there's risk, there's opportunity, and learning about, like, if you're going to be a great leader, where are the big bets actually going to be for your organization and for what it actually needs next? And this is interesting because when you think about leader-leader models, you want to be creating more leaders inside of your organization. And I've just been reading the whole story about Amazon, and it was an interesting conversation there about developing a leadership shadow. So this is important that if, you were no longer able to be in the business or you had to step out, rather quickly and someone else had to step back in, is there someone inside of that business today that's actually got a leadership shadow that they understand how to go to make great decisions? And I think that, Tim Cook is a great example of that with Steve Jobs. The conversation around what they're doing at Amazon is the same thing, and really starting to think, well, hang on a second, you actually need other people inside of your organization that have got that level of capability. So today, I guess that if you think about what leadership is, like, why would someone follow you? And it's not about being there's many followers on social. Like leadership is about that you are perceptive, that you are hungry, that you're humble, that you're people smart. Is that probably a couple of good places to start, in thinking about the attributes of making you a leader that other people want to follow?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, when you talk about leadership, there's always those kind of typical things that come to mind that, that you've just spoken about there. But I think from my perspective, not to say there's a leadership crisis, but I think there's very few leaders, Josh. It seems as though we live in a day and age where everybody is very good at maybe publicly perceiving their leadership skills, whether it be, via social media. Like everyone, it seems as though the leadership model we have these days for a lot of people is kind of do as I say, not as I do. And so the first thing I'm kind of looking for, I guess, out of myself is like my leadership style is I want my leadership style to be consistent with who I am as a human being. So when I wake up every morning, I'd like to think that it's not something I shouldn't have to wake up and try to be a good leader today. It's not like my personal life should be drastically different to what my life is, internally inside the business. So I think that what great leaders have, and I would suggest would be that their personal life is very consistent with what they're projecting in their business life. And then ultimately, are you a person that's actually worth following? I think that's the major piece of real estate for leadership, I should say. For me, it is influence, right? Do you have that influence where you're an aspirational leader where people go, you know what, I'm going to put the livelihood of my wife, my kids, my family, my financial well-being, right? I'm going to put that in the hands of this particular person. Like, have you actually earned the right to be that type of leader? So I think it's leadership is more about who you are as a person, less about what you project on social media, and are you actually consistent with what you are projecting?
And I remember this, Nick Dowling said to me in the very early days, just never do anything that you wouldn't want on the front page of the Australian Financial Review.
I've heard you say that to me before.
Yeah, well, I had to say it to you a few times. But that basic idea is that, there is sacrifices to leadership. And, mate, I'm definitely not the last one, going after the Christmas party. There's no doubt on that. And I think you're early doors on a lot of things as well. But that whole conversation is that, nothing ever great really ever happens after 9 p.m. anyway. And really your job here is to start to think very differently that, you need to never ever put yourself in a position of compromise because, reputations take decades to build and minutes to smash. And so from that point of view, in order to be a great leader, you've got to be able to demonstrate your ability to be able to remain calm under fire, but also to, at the same time too, be prepared to take the risks that others might not be interested in. And that's ultimately what we've got to call the change management piece, right? About being able to, cause effective change inside an organization. Phil, where do you invest your energy? Let's talk about that. In a disruptive age, where are the big bets for you on the energy curve to make sure that you can perform at your best as a leader?
I mean, there's a lot of things you could talk about there in terms of where you invest your energy, but I think it comes down to a philosophy around leadership and trying to simplify what is it you're trying to achieve, Josh. And I think that in this day and age, I'm still a firm believer that, great leadership is servant leadership. So ultimately it's about serving others and bringing the best out of others. So I think that, my personal leadership platform is really, as a leader of an organisation with over a couple of hundred staff, my responsibility is to, number one is obviously to have a vision for where the company is going, but ultimately I think it's about unlocking greatness in others. So my energy is focused every single day on how do I actually help other people to become the best version of them. Now, irrespective whether it's a salesperson, whether it's a property manager, whether it's an administrator, or whether it's a family member, I think that, greatness is about bringing the best out of other people. And so if that's the philosophy that you have around leadership, then you start to look at what's the wrap around all the other various strategies that are a part of that. So what sort of training you're providing, what sort of coaching, what sort of resources have you got to assist people in becoming the best version of themselves?
And it's kind of like that organizational chart where you've got the CEO at the top and then it works all its way down to the bottom. And normally that's a big pyramid. And then literally with servant leadership, you flip that so it's inverted so that all of those people actually are at the top right the way down to the CEO at the bottom. And that the CEO is like a guardian to ensure platforms for success for the people.
Which if you think about it, it's kind of quite counterculture to what we see today, which is if you subscribe to greatness in actual fact is actually about bringing greatness out of others, where it's almost like kind of cart before the horse almost with young leaders I see coming through our industry these days. Their version of greatness is about how do I project myself as being great and trying to drag people with them versus flipping that around, being the servant and actually bringing greatness out of others. And that's actually what elevates you when you become great at building others. And you think about any young leader who's listening to this who wants to build a great real estate business, ultimately, if you want to have a phenomenal business, if you become world-class at getting people to become the best version of themselves. Think of it from a salesperson perspective. If you can coach someone to go from writing $200,000 to $2 million in fees, you're going to have one of the best real estate businesses in the country.
And, that's that whole thing. The thing was, how to win friends and influence people. More talking about them and less talking about you. So Phil, how are you? How's the family? What's going on? Tell me about that. Make them feel important. And that old Mother Teresa thing, on the forehead, make me feel important with every person that you meet, regardless of position or where they sit inside of an organisation is a really important conversation. In order to do that, to be a great leader, you've got to be able to change your thinking on things and be able to move quite quickly and rapidly. Phil, one of the things that we developed was some very simple T-charts. So when I'm working on something, and this was initially came out of the COVID era where it's the government were very clear that these are the things that we couldn't do. And so what I did is I wrote down on the other side, what are the things that we can do? So At some points, if you remember, we weren't able to do open houses, but we were able to do private appointments, or we weren't able to go and do auctions in outside, but we were able to do them virtually. And so you start thinking about that. And I then started thinking about, well, how can I use those as a better quality leader today? So if I'm not able to do late nights because I've just got a young family that's just started, okay, great. Well, maybe I can employ somebody in my team who can. If I can't do open for inspections every Saturday and I want a Saturday a month off, so that I can spend some more time with my family, then no problem. So I'm going to employ someone who can actually do opens on a Saturday in my team. Agree on, work on. So when you're in an advanced negotiation, what are the foundational things that we just agree on? And what are the things that we actually need to work on? So even in a normal for sale situation, we might agree on everything else but the price. So just getting really clear on that. And then when we go into our leadership conversations around recruitment, okay, great. Who are the people that ultimately we could go to recruit right now? And then who are the people that are on that list that are actually mergers and acquisitions? And kind of what it does is it just allows you in under a couple of seconds to use a model that allows you to think through things in a very different way. Now, Les McCowan, for example, he wrote a book called Predictable Success, which you'd be aware of. And he said that ultimately business runs through a couple of different stages. So early struggle, that then leads into kind of fun. You remember that when you're just making money for the first time. Then there's kind of whitewater. All of these things are coming at you. How do you handle it? Beyond whitewater, you get to predictable success. You do this, you get that. Then after that, then you kind of get into treadmill, just going through the motion. And then beyond treadmill, you go into big rut. And then all of a sudden, you end up in this position of death rattle. Now, if you think about what actually happened in Australian business, Blockbuster, Video Easy, Sanity Music Stores, definitely all in death rattle. Bunnings hardware stores, probably Dan Murphy's, you would think would be in predictable success. Like wherever they open, they're just incredibly successful around what they do. Yet Masters hardware stores went from early struggle to death rattle in 18 months. And Bunnings went from early struggle to death rattle in the UK in under 18 months because they were selling outdoor barbecue equipment for 12 months of the year, which doesn't work in a location that's very cold. So your thoughts about how models can actually help you to change your thinking by putting things into boxes, so then you learn what to do to get out of that box. So then you're able to teach models to future leaders inside of your organisation that allow them to be able to make better, faster and smarter decisions.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come into mind there for me, Josh. First and foremost is the way I'm kind of relating to what you're saying is that, for me, it starts with that philosophy, right? So you've got to have a philosophy around that leadership space, which is what is it you want to achieve? And that's kind of, if you can't get clear on that, then it's going to be a battle after that. But if you've got a belief which says my role as a leader is to serve others and to help other people to become the best version of themselves, that's my starting point. And then afterwards, what I'm hearing from you is like, what are the actual tools that you've got available at your disposal to actually help people to grow? Mm-hmm. So it's one thing to go, yeah, great, I've got this philosophy that I just want to help people to actually get out there and achieve, but have you actually got the resources available, whatever that might be, to help people grow? But the second part of that, Josh, that you spoke about, it's interesting that it's almost, as humans, I think that we're better at dealing, so when things aren't going well or you're up against it, like we all have a natural survival instinct to kick in and hustle that growth phase, which is, if you've got a goal, you're riding 300, you want to get to 6, you want to get to 1, so you're in that growth mind. But then what I'm hearing is once you get on the treadmill and you're actually successful, one of the things we don't spend much time dealing with is actually how do you respond? You actually do become successful. Mm-hmm. Because the moment you actually become super successful, it's almost when you're the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. I was only listening to a podcast the other day, and I can't remember who I'll think of it during this podcast in a moment, but listening to the story of a boxer who did the unthinkable going back in the late 80s or 90s, but wasn't expected to, but ended up beating Mike Tyson in whatever match that was. Anyway, he came back for his first heavyweight title defense fight, right, and got absolutely smashed. And so his ability in the build-up to becoming a champion, he was very comfortable with that. But once he'd achieved mass success, just couldn't handle the success and became a complete failure after that. And so certainly that story you spoke about, the series of business, and I see how salespeople go through those same phases. Yeah,
I had a salesperson say to me the other week, I just wish COVID was back because I wrote really good numbers back then. and then, he just you actually don't, mate. But like what I can tell you is that everyone got carried away. And the secrets to success is that ultimately about systems. And, foundationally, if you're a salesperson, the business is very simple. Prospect, list, and sell. So if you're not in possession, you got to get in position. So what are the things that you're doing to get in position to go and do that? And so that's where models can be really helping at a leadership level, right?
I think the other thing, Josh, kind of coming to mind for myself is that, during your different phases of leadership, there's different, resource or strengths, I would say, at your disposal. I think when I first started my business when I was 28 years of age, I wasn't married and I didn't have kids. And so I really had unlimited time and unlimited energy in that leadership space to grow and to hustle and to do all of those sort of things.
Did you know that at the time?
No. No, I wasn't aware of it. And when you haven't got those other distractions, you just kind of go for it. It's just
investments, I believe Jen wants you to say.
Yeah, rather than distractions. Yeah, fair call. But on the flip side of that, where we are, just in terms of as you get maybe older and more mature, then I think the biggest risk in a leadership space, and what I see now, and it's really what you were speaking about before as well, I think leaders, the biggest challenge to face is actual apathy.
Yes.
So apathy is a very, very dangerous space for leaders. The moment that, and I've seen it with other businesses in South Australia, people who were very dominant in a particular space, the moment that you're not coming into your business every single day, trying to reinvent, trying to get better, trying to learn, when you stop reading books, when you stop attending courses, and you move into that apathetic mode, it's a really dangerous space as a leader.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is also about understanding what stages people are going through, and Phil, this was an interesting one because like recently I've seen some people that have gone through some very significant challenges in life, and believe it or not, they're actually at turning points. So there's kind of like a turning point of when you first have kids, there's turning points when all of a sudden the kids leave home. There's also turning points when all of a sudden you might get to certain ages and the majority of your friends are retiring and you think that you need to do the same. But yet you don't actually have to do that. And so I was having a look at this as an American time use case study, and they kind of said, up until about 27 or so, you spend a lot of time with your parents, siblings and family. And then naturally, your friends really come in and they're really important up until about 27 as well in terms of your time. And then for some reason, when your partner turns up, your friends, parents, siblings and family are no longer as important. And that then leads you into then children, and they like to come along, circa 27 right the way through until maybe 50s or so, just they like to hang out during your peak earning years and then they kind of go. And then beyond that, then you've then got co-workers who they're very hungry for your time from like 18 all the way through until about 60. They just seem to drop off for some reason. And then in addition to that, there's this green line here that just goes to show that as you're getting older, you're just going to be spending more time alone. And like, when you think about that, like all of those are actually inflection points, aren't they, where the friends aren't as important as you're coupling up and having kids and doing those things, and you got to get them out of the ground and make that happen. And then when the kids are 18, all of a sudden you're looking at each other going, is this the thing? And then, when all of your mates are apparently retiring, aren't you supposed to be retiring as well? It's like, well, no. And so I would say that, purpose and energy can come in a leadership space about, I really love what I'm doing at a work level. Sometimes it'll come from a family level about what I'm growing and what I'm creating. Sometimes it will be our spiritual lives, our community and connections and things that we've got around that. Sometimes it might be some other passions, some like really unique things like racing cars or, I don't know, doing knitting, like whatever the thing is that you really love to do. And it's about making sure that you ignite those passion centers to allow you to become a phenomenal leader. And I always just think about this as that, either I'm a common enemy and I'm talking about others and I wake up every day obsessed about how I beat someone, or I actually think about how do I become the role model in this space? So how do I become the best in the world at what I do? And I'm never going to achieve that, Phil. I'm going to be constantly working at that every day because I think that I could, cut this podcast better. I could have said something better. I could have had a better topic. I could have prepared you better. Like, there's always something that I could have done. And so when you have that unending desire to have continuous improvement around what it is that you do, it helps you to become a much better leader because people are like, wow, like the level of hunger and the desire is just pretty phenomenal around that particular person. Thoughts about that and how important it is that you maintain your energy for leadership, because I've seen a few people of late that have kind of got to different ages and all of a sudden, bang, something's happened and they've just dropped away. And it's been amazing to watch, and in some respects quite sad to watch it too, that they've kind of given up, I guess, a little bit on wanting to push and wanting to drive and wanting to do that thing inside of their business. And I don't think it's because of a desire to do it, because they just lose confidence when they hit certain ages or certain events happen to them.
Yeah, I think you probably summarise it pretty well, Josh, but it goes back to what I mentioned before, that danger as you progress through your career. And I think it's, there's leaders that I know, Josh, at 60 years of age, who I would say that leader is old and they are tired.
Mm-hmm.
You can see them worn out. In fact, we were speaking about one offline before we started the podcast, right?
Mm.
But then on the other hand, there's other 60-year-old leaders, Josh, that I see that I feel like they haven't even hit their prime yet. Like they are on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's certainly people that I follow, and it's almost like, so age is not the relevancy. It's what we spoke about before, which is avoiding apathy. So if you still have a phenomenal thirst and passion for learning, sharing, and spreading that message and growing with others, then I think that you're going to get a whole lot more longevity. So in terms of the energy space, I would simply relate it back to a continual passion for growing, learning, getting better, staying in your lane. Like you said it best before. And it is really, really difficult, I think. Like, real estate is a very, very, very competitive. It's probably the only industry in the world where we really do obsess over what the competition is doing. Like, you don't see other professional services posting about their services they provide and
made a pizza, sold a pizza.
Yeah, how many tax returns they processed and all of those sort of things. So it's a very external game, but the reality is true success is created internally, and every single person who's tuning in, like, everyone's got so many things that they could improve on themselves that the competition has absolutely no ability to dictate over, versus going internally saying, where are the things that I need to get better at? What are the things that I need to focus on? How can I be a better person? How can I be a better agent? How can I be a better leader? None of that's got to do with anybody else. Focus on those things, maintain what I would call a lust for learning, and you're going to continue to grow in your leadership space.
Favourite leaders in business and why? Any that come to mind?
My favourite leaders in business? Well, I think, there's a guy, Erwin McManus, out of the US. I enjoy his space, but particularly kind of in the real estate space. It's probably, you and I, we grew up seeing what John McGrath did in that space. I think in this day and age, I feel like in the real estate space now, it's probably a real emerging space. I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot of great leaders within the real estate space. I think someone who has a big impact on you and I respect greatly is probably Nick Dowling from Gillis Craig. I think he does a great space. Yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting. I look at things very differently. I have read a lot of books. So a lot of the people that I would say are great leaders, I've not actually even met physically. So I'd say, without a doubt, Tom Peters has been a phenomenal operator in how he would think and challenge you to grow. That Liz Wiseman wrote a great book, about being a multiplier or a detractor. So like that's always stuck with me from day one. Jim Collins obviously wrote some of the Bibles on that sort of stuff. Vern Harnish was unbelievable around what he did with his piece. There was no doubt. I think like I'm reading the new Elon Musk book at the moment, and like, man, that guy's absolutely unbelievable at the things that he's trying. You got to give him that. Now, whether or not it's chaotic leadership or not, like, he is absolutely pushing the edges on a whole heap of things. I think the opening chapter to that book, he says, like, I'm talking about living on Mars. I've taken over and I'm sort of launching more satellites than any other nation in the world. I've reinvented the electric car and I'm having great conversations around how I create satellite internet. And I'm now inadvertently providing first aid, rehabilitation type services with what we're going to do with Neuralink, but also too, now my satellites are helping, the Red Cross to be able to go into some of these war-torn parts of the world. And he goes, and you legitimately thought I was going to be a chill dude. And you kind of like, you think about that, it's like, wow, like that leadership space does have a ton of risk, and he is really out there on what he's doing. I think, some of the more calmer leaders have been interesting. Herb Kelleher behind, South by Southwest or, Southwest Airlines was probably one of the great turnaround kings. And I think that's a really interesting thing is that, what are you looking for in your leadership? And I'll probably tell you someone who's written a great book on it. John Gordon, for example, the Energy Bus, he's done some really good stuff. And I think Tony Schwartz was, The Powerful Engagement was probably one of the most foundationally phenomenal books. And so I think that like leadership is everywhere, and you can see it in a 5-year-old going to school, and you can also see it in an 88-year-old too. So I don't think that there's an age profile, demographic, level of income that determines great leadership. I think that one of the great lines I was always taught is that, I don't need to be in control, but if no one's in control, I'm in control. So like literally, I'm not going to let this go down. If you need me to step into that leadership role, I'm going to go and do it. And it really comes back down into, being clear about, where you're going. I think that, Phil, you've built a phenomenal organisation, but about that clarity about, vision, which always comes back down to the essential elements, right? Like purpose, mission and values, and then strategies, tactics and measurements. And, one of the things I think about your values a lot, I talk about them in conferences a lot to people, say, grow as a team and work as a leader and think like a customer. And like, that's how Harris lives out it's every day. Why is it really important for a leader to have tools like a list of values like that inside of an organization, and how does it help them to guide behavior and to take the organization into new territories?
Yeah, I think the mission, purpose, values is probably an interesting space for us at Harris. I would say going back years ago, Josh, we were probably guilty of just having mission, purpose, values that were maybe in a book somewhere or maybe on the wall, but they weren't really known by by many inside the organisation. I would say now our mission, purpose, and values, definitely at an executive level, would be the clearest that they have ever been. Even more so, brand promises now for our internal customer of what it is that we actually want people. What we want, why people should actually join our organisation, and why people would stay with us. We're very clear on that. In terms of the purpose and the reason for it, I think one of the key things about leadership, and maybe where people don't quite understand it, Josh, is I think that one of the key roles of leadership is just alignment. You are continually aligning people. Like, once you start putting a couple hundred people under a couple of roofs across multiple offices, like, no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. The leader's not perfect. The people inside the organisation are not perfect, but there's got to be some form of North Star that actually acts as alignment. So we all agree that we're not perfect, but we all agree that that's the destination of where we are headed. So in terms of the actual mission, so we're crystal clear on the mission in terms of where we want to get to. And the values, I would suggest, is more like kind of the roadmap that says these are kind of the guiding points that are going to help us to try and arrive at that destination. And then it's just continually trying to align your people with those mission, purpose, and values.
I think the basic thing here is develop a toolkit that allows other people to become leaders. So that in absence of a policy, procedure, or way of doing something, that you've actually got some guiding rails to assist you in being able to make those decisions quite quickly whenever those things happen.
And I think inside a real estate office particularly, Josh, and by the way, I think that real estate offices cultures, it's a really challenging one. Like, it's an insane business where we want to play as a team. We want to have shared values. Yet every single salesperson probably is an independent contractor, even if they're on an employment contract. It's hard for salespeople to get excited because the person sitting two rows over sold 6 properties last month and you sold 2. Like, no one's getting kind of super excited. So it's kind of a little bit of a counterintuitive culture in how we harvest that. But what I would say about values inside an organisation is where maybe the industry struggles, is like sometimes there's a dispute over whether it be data or whether it be about a lead or whether by whatever. Like, why would I go ahead and help that person? Because, at the end of the day, if they get that lead and I don't, well, what's that going to do for me? Well, because that's what a good human being would do. And that's what values do. Hang on, let's actually step outside of this situation. How would a fair and reasonable, healthy human being respond in this situation?
And this is the interesting part, because when I go into a business to say, so, what's the plan? What's the strategic plan this year? So we're going to grow by an extra 500 property managements, are we? Okay, great. We're going to get an extra 200 sales. So strategically, how are we going to do that? And what's amazing is the void of leadership, of the strategy, and then the specific tactics and the measurement. And I think, this leader's trying to put 5,000 things into their business, but they haven't landed one yet. And it's kind of like, when you hear that idea of what's going to move the needle the most, if we just did that one thing. So if you spend an hour on prospecting for new salespeople for your business every week, tell me the compound impact of that over 40 weeks of a year. Rather than trying to do, we're going to do these great, videos on socials and all the above. It was interesting. I got hit by a Harris ad on Instagram last night, and it was for recruitment. And it was like, the 3 really important things for Harris is about the platform and the organization and also to the access to training and whatever. And the way that it was done was exceptional. And I thought, man, he's trying to recruit me now. But the basic idea here is that, you got to think that, understand what people actually really want and value, and then make sure your organization is deep with that, not surface level or glossy with the marketing, but literally as soon as you scratch away.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think that we were definitely guilty of being glossy going back years ago. But those brand promises now, Josh, that you got obviously tickled by last night while you were surfing on the gram. But those brand promises of having a platform of operational excellence, making sure we provide great coaching and training, and then thirdly, making sure our leadership is fair and reasonable. That's really important to us. But one of the key things, kind of quick tool here, you spoke there about having clarity over the mission. I know one of the things that you've really been big on over the years, and you first introduced this to me going back many years ago, and then scaling up, has now become a key part of our organisation, is just that simple one-page Everest mission. So inside our organisation, we have absolute clarity of where we want Harris Real Estate to be in 3 years' time, which is X amount of sales and X amount of managements. And that's structured over a 3-year period. And for each of those 3 years, we know the milestones of the KPIs of the numbers. But then we've also just got 3 critical projects that need to be executed for each of those years. And provided we can do that, we will end up in that space. So there's total clarity over the numbers and the projects that need to be done.
Final part of today, and you kind of already stolen our thunder as per usual, but servant leadership, right? You're on earth to serve others. I think this is a really important one. You know, the great old school thing that whenever you're going to hire someone, go to a restaurant with them and see how they treat the waiter. You know, be in a conversation around, see how you help people that are less fortunate than you. What can you do to inspire others rather than intimidate or maybe drive others' insecurities? And how do you connect? And you know, it's a really interesting thing that what I do when I'm going into an organization for the first time, I will often ask the leadership team to be the ones that are there at training to hand out the name tags for everyone who's coming in, because they've got to get back in front of their people and they've got to connect with their people. And it's beautiful to see, you know, when there's happy smiles and hugs and you know, all of those things going on inside of an organization, because the leaders are really connected with their people and they want to be there. And I think that's the big difference, that if the leader can invest the time to be there, then everyone else can invest the time to be there. And I think that servant leadership, you are there to serve others. And I always say this, like I walk into a sales business, a property management business, any real estate business in the country, every single person who's in that room has the ability to have me fired that day. So if I say something that's not right, or they felt belittled, or that I wasn't inclusive, or I didn't connect with them, or I didn't inspire them, I'm done. And so the interesting conversation of like what I realize is that even the person that you might perceive to have the lowest level of power, who's the newest person who's just joined the team, if you can connect with them and make them feel important, it's phenomenal. I was in a business the other day where the youngest team member in the room was 16 years old. So they finished school. They're not going on with year 11 and year 12. They've made a decision that real estate's going to be for them. And I made the effort, even though they were there early and they were very young, to walk up and have a conversation and open them up and be a part of that. Recently, we were up in one of the Gold Coast. There's a phenomenal TAFE at Robina, and one of our clients actually uses that as a function space. And they bring in all of these kids who are like 13, 14, 15 years old that are going through. And I was talking to one of the girls and she's like 13. I said, "Oh, how are you going?" And she goes, "All good." She goes like, "I've been studying for 8 weeks and today is my first chance of live service. I actually get to be in front of a live customer." I was like, "Wow, how's that going for you?" She goes like, "You know, we've been prepping for this morning tea for the last 4 hours to make sure that everything is beautifully laid out." And just the attention to detail was just phenomenal. And you realize that you can learn from others and you can also teach so many others as well. Feeling good and ready for more? Thanks for joining us
On Dream Big,
Move Fast.